platform is really clear communication and organization. So I would email the students weekly on Wednesdays with a list of all of the assignments that they were responsible for in advance of our Tuesday meetings, or Monday meetings rather. So we only met on Zoom once a week rather than twice, and that was a deliberate choice that I had made. I conducted this class in mixed format, meaning part of their learning was synchronous and part of it was asynchronous. So again, every Wednesday I would email them recorded lectures, different articles, any announcements that were coming up that were relevant and important. So those Wednesday communications were consistent and the students would know what they needed to come to class prepared to discuss on Monday. Another key point that I would drive home during those communications is that there were discussion questions that they should think about in advance and that we would spend the class time during Zoom going over in breakout groups, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So in terms of meeting frequency, I did mention that we met once a week on Mondays, and this semester it will be on Tuesdays because of the different schedule that we have. And then just to go back to the communication and organization, in addition to emailing students in advance of each session, I also had organized very clearly labeled folders in Blackboard about which assignments were pertaining to which week. So students knew how to access that on Blackboard and also had that information through the weekly emails that I sent them. So I do think that because we're in a virtual environment, it is really important to have clear communication and clear organization to set everyone up for success. So in terms of the meeting frequency, I mentioned that we just meet once a week on Mondays, and I'll share some data about how students perceived that frequency of meeting. And then in terms of the structure of the meetings, I would typically begin with a roadmap of the class. So I would tell them what exactly it was that we were going to be covering that day, whether that included announcements, a summary of the lectures that we were that they were responsible for. So typically they would listen to a lecture in advance on VoiceThread, but I would go through the highlights of that lecture at the beginning of our synchronous meetings on Monday, just so that they had a high-level overview of what was discussed in the recorded lecture, just as a refresher. And then I would also provide any other items that we were going to cover in that class. So whether that was we were going to use polls, and then our breakout sessions, I just laid it all out at the beginning of class, what exactly it is that we would be doing, so everyone knew where we were going that day. And then we typically would end the session, the remaining time, the kind of last 20 to 30 minutes of the session was devoted to breakout rooms in Zoom. So what I did for this class, because it was a large class and because I wanted students to have some continuity in terms of, getting to know their peers. I think in a virtual environment, you can easily feel lost, that you maybe don't have a connection to other students or to your faculty members. I pre-assigned them to breakout groups using a feature in Zoom. So you can pre-assign up to 200 people into breakout groups or breakout rooms. And so this does require that the participants' email addresses in advance, and then you can upload a CSV file to Zoom and it can pre-assign people for you. So I use this feature so that I kept the students in the same groups throughout the course of the semester, so that, again, they could build that rapport with their fellow classmates, have some continuity and stability in terms of their discussion groups. So I would typically give them about 3 to 4 different questions to respond to in their breakout groups. We often had polls about which questions students wanted to respond to. So depending on how much time we had, we would either do between 3 and 4 different questions per week. So I would sometimes poll the students and see which were their top choices of questions that they wanted to discuss in their breakout groups. So one of the purposes of this was that so it wouldn't just be strictly a lecture class. I did want students to be able to actively participate, despite the fact that it is a large class and many times that can result in sort of passive learning. I wanted students to have an active role in their own learning and bring their own knowledge and input to the class. And then some other features of Zoom that I used, that this is number 4 now. So we did use polls for a variety of different reasons. So for example, in the first class, I wanted to just get a sense of who the students were, what their racial and ethnic backgrounds were, their gender identity, whether they themselves were parents, because this was a class of developmental psychology. So I wanted to understand a little bit more about experiences with children or youth, whether they had children of their own or had children in their families. So we often use that polling feature just to get a sense of it, take the temperature of the room and understand who the composition of the class really is. And then you can share those polls with the students so that they can see what the results were. We also, at one point I had talked a little bit about bilingualism in the class, because again, it is a developmental psychology class, and I polled students to see how many of the students were bilingual, and the results show that there were about 75% of the class that were bilingual. So this sparked some conversation about the benefits of bilingualism. So I was able to kind of open up the floor for some more discussion amongst the students. So it is a nice way to be able to engage people, even if it's a large section, get some input from them, and then even have some conversations. And that makes the class feel a little bit more intimate. The chat feature was available to students as well. So sometimes they would enter responses if they didn't want to participate verbally, or maybe difficult to get a lot of students to participate verbally when there's such a large number. So several of them would respond in the chat box, and I did have 2 TAs for this class, so they could help moderate the chat box as well. So I plan to continue that feature this time around. And then I did use I did take attendance in the class, just because I do feel like attendance is important. It's important to show up and actively participate. So Zoom has a feature where you can see who participated in your meeting. So I recorded that regularly and accessed that report regularly, and was able to track student attendance over the course of the semester, which was a very helpful feature. I also used polls, to go back to the polls for a moment. I did use it to continuously improve the course. So for example, I elicited feedback from students on their preferences. So I had asked them in some polls, how do you feel about the amount of time in the breakout rooms? If we did 20 minutes, is that too little, too much, or just right? And then we kind of adjusted the amount of time from there. I had also asked them whether they wanted to lump all of the breakout session questions together into one, or if they wanted to have 3 discrete breakout sessions where we do the first question, come back together as a class and have a large group discussion, and then move on to the second question, which they indicated through the polls that was their preference. They wanted it broken up. So I really tried to gather student feedback to the extent that I could, using the polls feature. And then I wanted to share some survey data from the students. So about a month into the class, I took an informal survey, or an anonymous survey rather, just to get some student feedback to see how they were doing, both emotionally as well as academically. So when about 99 students did respond to the survey, and this was out of approximately 120, so fairly good response rate. So most of them said that they were doing either pretty good or just okay psychologically and emotionally at this point in the semester. I thought this was important to ask given the pandemic and the transition to online learning. So I wanted to check in and again, take the temperature of the students. And then I asked also about academically, how they felt they were doing. And again, most said that they were doing just okay or pretty good. Only a handful, about 9%, said that they were not doing well. So that was important for me to get a sense about, early on in the semester. I asked also about the format of the mixed online class. Again, we met once a week in person, and then the rest of the week they had to do their work asynchronously. And so they said that that was pretty good. About 50% of them said it was pretty good, and another 17% said it was just okay. A minority, just 8.1%, said it was not well, and then about a quarter said it was great. So overall, given the initial feedback that I got, they liked this mixed online format, which was something I had never experimented with before. I also asked about how they like it. So the last question rather was, how was it working for you? And this one was more about how they liked it. So similarly, most of them said that it's either okay or it's great. So also was pretty pleased with that. And then I asked for some open-ended questions about what was working well for them in the course. So they generally seemed to be satisfied. They liked actually meeting only once a week, saying that it gave them more time to work on their own. And I had recorded VoiceThread lectures, as I mentioned, so that they liked that because it allowed them to go back to the lectures and listen to them at their own pace. Several of them commented that they liked the breakout groups, that it gave them an opportunity to really speak with their other classmates. And again, the clear communication and organization came up as a piece. I know even anecdotally, some students had thanked me for continuing to be organized and communicating with them any changes or any updates and weekly announcements. Some said that the workload was not overly heavy. I think this is attributed to the fact that I broke it up so that we were meeting once a week, and then they had more time on their own and flexibility to do some of this work on their own time. And then I asked what I could do to improve the course, and this may be helpful for others who are thinking of designing their online courses. Some wanted me to go over the assignment due dates at the end of each class, give some more time for large group discussion outside the breakout groups. So we did eventually do that later on in the semester. I allowed for more time for the full 120 students to open up the floor for discussion. Some requested that we mix up the breakout groups sometimes. So I did keep them together the whole time in the same groups. So this semester I plan to try to mix it up occasionally. Some wanted to see more video clips, which I did start to incorporate a little bit more in the semester. Some also wanted to know how attendance was captured. So this semester I'm going to add columns in Blackboard to populate after each session to let them know whether they were marked present or not, so that we can clarify any missing attendance along the way. And then some of them appreciated having a study sheet for the exam, so they wanted to keep that. And then some of them wanted the assignments a week in advance rather than just on Wednesday. So they wanted it the prior Monday, which I think is an easy adjustment to make. And then they also had asked for some review before the exams and then more lecture time. So some wanted more, rather than more breakout groups, more lecture time. So those are some of the kind of key points that I had for my session. So I'm happy to kind of turn it over to Nancy for the next portion. She's going to talk about working with a medium-sized class and some of the successes that she's had.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. A lot of what Suzanne shared are best practices. So I'm going to talk a lot. Well, basically, I'm going to tell you about my experience with my classes. I'm going to also share my screen. I only have a few slides, but I think they're important to share. Let me see if I can share my screen now. Okay. Okay. Here we go. Can you see it? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So I have been teaching online for over 20 years, and I am a firm believer of a combination or the blended or hybrid model of synchronous and asynchronous activities. What has changed in the last year is that in the past I had one face-to-face class a week and then one online. And because of that one face-to-face class, there was a lot of time for interaction, for group work, for student engagement in different ways. So I wanted to keep that when we moved to fully online. So if you're familiar with best practices in online teaching, there are a number. I mean, you can go and look at journals and studies and reports for the last 25 years of what works and what doesn't work well. But my experience has been that blending or combining both synchronous and asynchronous, like Suzanne mentioned, in her large class, works very well for students. Now, this combination, of course, there are advantages and there are limitations to both formats. But I believe, and this research supports, that synchronous plus asynchronous actually it turns into more student engagement. We get more student engagement, and therefore there is more learning. Now, my experience during the pandemic, my Zoom experience, I had not used Zoom for actual classes. I had used Zoom in the past for meetings and for conferences, but turning now this face-to-face component of my classes into a Zoom experience took some tweaking and getting more familiar with the tools and how I could best use those tools for my classes. So I had in the fall 2 counseling and human service courses. The program planning 300 level course, I had 35 students. So it's a mid-size we could consider, or if you look at Suzanne had 120 students, so it's a small class compared to that. And then the senior capstone, which is a smaller class, 8 students. Unfortunately, this semester is going to be 3 times this size. So I've had to make some changes because a capstone requires a lot of one-on-one support. Both of the classes, as I mentioned earlier, I used the hybrid format, synchronous and asynchronous. There was a lot of writing, high stakes writing, because they're both classes at 300 and 400 levels. So they are, most of the students are seniors. Now, what I decided in the fall that changed from the spring when we turned completely online was that instead of meeting every week as a group, as a class, we were going to meet every other week, because I wanted small groups and individual meetings on the week that we were not going to meet as a group. I was still going to be available to students, but we were going to meet in small groups because of the one-on-one support that students needed for their high stakes writing, feedback, peer reviews, and so forth. The Blackboard content was divided, and this I've been doing for many years, divided by weeks and topics. So week 1, introduction to program planning during the pandemic, kind of thing, right? I'm sorry. There is a PowerPoint posted on Blackboard each week prior to the Zoom session for the program planning class, not for the capstone, because we don't use an actual textbook. We use a number of different resources and readings. And for the capstone, students have 2 major projects. One is an evaluation plan, and the other one is their summative portfolio. And for these 2 major assignments, students need ongoing feedback as well. And it's based on what program they're evaluating versus the other one is the program that they're developing. So in program planning, students need a lot of support in terms of what are the different components of a program, how they develop those components. And in the capstone, is more about evaluating a program. What worked for both the medium-sized section as well as the smaller section was something that was previously mentioned, weekly announcements and reminders. I can't emphasize this enough. I coincide with my colleague. You need to be very specific. You have to be organized, communicate frequently, and at least once a week, students need to be reminded of what is due, what are the topics for discussion, or the guide questions that would be covered in the Zoom session. So again, I would post reminders. I also, if we did not meet that week, had an overview at the end of the week, a weekly overview of where they were supposed to be and what was supposed to be completed. All assignments are due on Saturday before midnight at 11:59. So our weekly meetings are on Monday, and then Saturday, they have to submit the assignments for that week. For the chat, I try to keep the chat for questions and short answers because students get distracted sometimes trying to read what is being posted on the chat or the questions, and they may lose track of what we're trying to discuss at the time. So I tell students you could post questions And again, try to keep them short. And the same with answering those questions. If I see that there are a number of similar questions, I would then, of course, combine them for a more complete answer. Polls. This is the first time actually that I used polls the way that I mean, in the past I had used other tools, but using polls this time was extraordinary for to get an idea of student comprehension, if they were reading the material, if they understood the material. I would have these questions. And I saw someone in the chat was asking if you have to have the poll questions in advance. That's recommended, but you can actually write a poll question. I have done it right there and then at the beginning if I see that there's a need for something that has not been either understood, or students have more than one questions about a specific thing. I may poll them to see if they were able to understand the difference between X and Y. So for comprehension, consultation, and getting student feedback, again, this is something that also Suzanne shared, knowing, how students feel, if they're ready to move on to the next phase, if they were able to complete the outline for the program, or if they knew the difference between goals and objectives. These things help a lot in terms of knowing when students are ready to move on and when we have to stop and pause and go back. There are a number of ways we could use polls, but I use them for these two major purposes: comprehension and consultation, which is also feedback from the students. Breakouts. Breakout rooms, I use both formats. I have pre-assigned groups when they are working on their program plans and they are their target population, the population that they're developing the program for is similar. It's a similar target population. I would group students based on those. They'll sign up in Blackboard. They'll sign up in Blackboard where they decide which target population or group they will be designing a program for. And then based on that, I move those groups then into the breakout rooms ahead of time. And they know exactly when it's time for them to get together during the Zoom session. Also for peer reviews, students give each other feedback. We all know that when we try to schedule group work, students always have issues because one of them, their peers didn't show up, or maybe one is doing most of the work, the other one isn't. This is something that happens all the time. Sorry, I have bad allergies. Also helps devoting time from your Zoom session to engage students and to make sure that they have an opportunity to do their group work or get together during these breakout sessions. And there's no excuse later on that they were not able to meet with their classmates. Also to elaborate on, I use a lot of discussion boards, and to elaborate on postings that I may have read, and I may want students to elaborate more because sometimes they don't go into very specifics, or their critical thinking or analysis is not comprehensible. So we want them to elaborate on those postings. So doing breakout sessions where they each share what they had posted and what they meant. Complete, group assignments, prepare for group presentations. So these are the ways I use the breakout sessions. And again, the students' feedback has been very positive. Students like the fact that they're able to spend time with their peers, to troubleshoot, to brainstorm, to share. And especially during the pandemic, this was crucial because of the sense of isolation that we all went through. Giving students this opportunity really made a difference. And then what I'm doing now, which is, sharing the screen, right? Students could share their screens for group and poster presentations. For the senior capstone students have to develop a poster. And, in the ideal world, in the pre-pandemic times, they would develop these posters and put them all over the campus and get feedback from peers and from faculty, have this display, but unfortunately we can't do that now. But providing the opportunity for them to still develop their poster presentations and share them through Zoom helps students fulfill that component or that requirement of the course. So again, polling, chats, breakout rooms, screen sharing, these were the tools that I used the most and that students benefit from the most. Being organized for and letting students know ahead of time what to expect, it's extremely important, especially if they are assigned to give a presentation and they need to be in their groups for the breakout sessions ahead of time, knowing that they can't sign in or log in late because it's going to affect your groups. The polling, as I mentioned earlier, I love it. And the chats for specific questions or answers, and the screen sharing. Now, my colleague Henry is going to talk about whiteboarding. I haven't really used much whiteboarding, but I know it's also a great tool for synchronous teaching and learning. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If you have any questions at the end, feel free to ask. Henry?
Thank you for the warm transfer. And thank you all for joining us this morning. Allow me to share my screen. And a thumbs up if you can see my PowerPoint. Perfect. So my class is the smallest of the three. It is the Tao Fellowship course that is a 2-semester series consisting of 8 fabulous scholars. And I learned Zoom along with my students, meaning that they taught me some tricks of the trade. I studied tutorials online, but it wasn't enough until we were live and I realized I didn't understand the student side of things. So first, you want to set some Zoom norms. With all of my courses, I try to set norms in general of how we will behave as a community. But I just morphed it a little bit to talk about what that means in terms of Zoom as well. And we will revisit the norms that we set in the fall for this spring. We are a 2-hour session every week. And as grueling as that is in person, it is as grueling online, if not worse. So I do try to squeeze in a break for them. I'm a bit animated in person, but I realize online I have to be more animated to make sure that we can make it to the first break. Yeah. And so encourage students to use the chat feature while you're giving your lecture. I automatically encourage them to interrupt me anyway, but if they don't want to, they have the option to use the chat feature to inject their thoughts into the discussion. And when I see that blinking, it's a reminder that when I've come down to my pause, I'll go over to the chat box and see what has been added to the discussion and give that person credit for adding to the discussion. Now, using unmutes, we are not in person. Often in person, I can see the students are swarming in their seat if they have something to say or they're about to explode, so I'll call on them. Here, I use the unmutes that I see happening in real time, and I kind of sequence that. So if someone unmuted before, say student A unmuted first, and then student B does it almost right after, I'll call on student A first and then give the floor to student B. So using sort of technology to give us the human cues that we would normally get in person. Now, this doesn't apply to me, but it may apply to Suzanne or maybe even Nancy. But if you have a large class, I did witness this doing a peer observation. Instead of just throwing the question out there for 200 students to answer, have a short list prepared of, say, maybe 6 students that you'll call on to answer that question. Because what I find is we don't know which students are going to unmic. And so you're getting a downpour of background noise when you just throw a question out to the seat. And then lastly, we're going to do a little prac app here, but I first want to talk about it. Whiteboarding is susceptible to Zoom bombing. I don't necessarily have that problem with my students because I know the names of the students. But if you have more than 20, you may want to use that waiting group feature that you experienced this morning. And that will give you an opportunity to vet the names and check them across your roster to make sure you're not inviting in a hacker. And whiteboarding, if you do invite a hacker into the space, whiteboarding allows them to write whatever they want on the screen, right? And usually it's vulgarity or something offensive. There's additional settings that you could set up. You could Google this or send me an email where you could limit it to just folks with a John Jay extension to their email. And so that's another way to prevent the Zoom bombing. So if you've heard all of the gossip and so forth about it, it is real, but those are two sort of standard ways of how you could prevent that. Now, I'll show you the instructor view. How do you start whiteboarding? So the same way you share your slides with students, you'll click on the share screen option at the bottom in the middle of your screen. And instead of clicking on your screen, you see here where it's highlighted in yellow, you just simply click on whiteboard and you click on share. That will bring up the whiteboard. So that's the instructor view. Today, you're the students, right? So as we do the practical application, what you're looking for is the annotation piece that's going to allow you to participate. This is the piece that I learned from my students. So I couldn't see this side of it. And so one student, I guess, may have used it before, or she was clicking around at the time we were all learning it together. But students will look in the upper right-hand corner of their screen for the View Options button. And once they click on View Options, then they have the option to click on Annotate. So these are two steps I want you to remember. On the student side today, you'll click on View Options and click on Annotate. That will give you the option to participate in today's exercise. So I'm going to start that now. So bear with me. I'm going to stop the screen share with the PowerPoint. Now I'm going to screen share the whiteboard. Just give me a thumbs up when you see the whiteboard pop up on your screen. Perfect. Now look in the upper right-hand corner for the view options. Select that. And on that list, it should be horizontal. Look for Annotate and click on it. Now what I'm going to do is set up this exercise. So in this particular course, we tackle many social justice topics. Perfect. And one of the topics that is central to social justice is identities. We understand that most of these struggles that folks go through is based on their identities. So I'm going to create a list that I want you to participate in. So in 2010, I want you to think back and tell me if I spell that right, identities. Thumbs up. In 2010, think about who you were and how you identify. And just under the words 2010 identities, I want you to put what those were. I'm going to give you an example of what one of mine were, which was jarhead. I still felt like a Marine at the time, right? Charging my way through life. So try to keep that on the left side of the screen. And then once you're done with that, I want you to come over here in 2020 and under these words, 2020 identities, I want you to think about who you are. Well, you know what? Let me change that. We're now in a new year. So I'm going to erase that. And we're in 2021. I'm getting with the times. And now think about in 2021, what are your identities? And the point of this exercise is to get you to see that we change and we're mutable. And sometimes it's about the struggles and the fights that we take up, but it's also us getting to understand who we are as people and being okay with the fact that we change. I see someone put stressed. that could be an identity, right? You could be a part of a community that is all about being stressed. Someone put recent grad. So in 2010, they were a recent grad. If that same person could sort of think about 2021, who they are now. You could change the color. Now, one of the things I want to point out about whiteboarding, if you're covering a sensitive topic in class, keeping it anonymous is a good idea. And especially if you've already put in the security protocols so that you don't have to worry about the Zoom bombing effect. I like some of these. I'm going to try to move some of these. If you also, so you could change the color. If you see at the top here where it says format, it will give you a color palette. So if you notice that everyone's typing in blue because that's the default, now try to change your color so that you're unique. And within the Zoom settings, you could also Google these instructions, or I can send them to you. You could turn on so you could see who's typing what. Right now it's turned on. So you should be able to see Daniel typing. I think I saw Sagar type free or grad student. So I'm going to stop here. Just know that this is a good way to sort of allow people to participate and add to the discussion. You could then use the words that students are contributing on the board to either invite them to uncloak themselves or to usher in further discussion. Sometimes I think it's better when people are bold enough to uncloak, allow them to state what was behind what they put on the board. Obviously, there's a multitude of ways you can use whiteboarding, but I'm going to stop here. We're going to do a little Q&A, and Patrizia might have some additional items for you to close our session. And I will monitor the chat board to see if you have any questions as well for this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Henry. And I'm here to give you a short practice session. So you'll be acting as students, and one is about polling. So some of you know it already, but some of you may want to go through the experience. So I'm going to start a poll for you right now, and I'm going to ask you to answer the questions. Can you see the poll coming up? Yes. When you're launching a poll as an instructor, you will see how many participants voted. So you can have a sense when you can stop the poll. Almost 82%, 85%, we're almost there. Okay, let me end it here. And then when I end the poll, I will be able to share the results. So now I'm going to share the results with you. Okay, so no, you're not more, well, majority, yeah. And who feels guilty when meeting? No, very few. Great. Multitasking. Very few are 100% focused like me. Anyway, so this is the idea. This is I'm going to stop, and now I can show you briefly how you set it up. I thought there was a discussion about whether you can do a polling while you're at the meeting. I don't recommend it. I'm going to share the screen and I show you briefly, and then we can always send you the instructions. Okay, let me share the screen. Okay, so this is the Zoom on the web. You have to go on the web where you can set up your meeting. You schedule a meeting. I have scheduled it already. And at the very bottom, you will have a place where you can create a a poll. You have not created any polls. So you can create the polls here by clicking on add, and you have the selection whether you want to do a yes, no, single choice or a multiple choice. I'm a nervous type, so I generally like to set my polls ahead of time. So anyway, this is the way. The second activity I can show you is through the chat. Let me share the screen. This sometimes works with big groups sometimes, but you have to be very careful and listen to my instructions. So let me share the screen again. And I'm gonna share, I'm going to see, okay. Sorry, okay, let me just, oh, this is not the right, sorry. That's what happens. Okay, I want this slide, okay? So you have to be ready. Okay, this is the question, okay? And you need to open your chat box and you need to think about the question. Type it in the chat box, but do not press enter. Do not send it, okay? So everybody should think about the answer, type it in, and only send it when I give you the go, okay? So let me wait a couple of seconds for you to be ready, and then I will tell you when you send it. Did you all find the chat box? I hope so. Yeah. Okay. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, now we all go. What should happen in the chat, we can see, and this is a way to engage the students just in case you see them losing you. You have that sense that you have, like, you know, all at the same time, you see the response. Screen fatigue, it can be boring. And then you can discuss about it. It's also good for brainstorming and other activities. Okay, let's try another one. What surprised me? Oh, sorry. Okay, stop now and answer this question. What surprised me the most about switching to distance learning is, now again, type it in. Wait until I give you the go. Go. How exhausting it is. Okay, so you can comment, everybody can see what other people have, and it's just a very fast activity that for you to use with the chat. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay, and the last thing, oh yeah, the last thing I want to show you is something you can get at the end of your session, a response from students. You see that at the bottom of your windows, you see reactions, okay? So you can ask the students to react to the session using those icons, but let me show you, okay. Where am I? Sorry. Okay, I must have closed my, hold on. Let me stop sharing because I wanted to show you a few slides. Okay, I got them here. Okay.
Patrizia, we have 10 minutes left in the session.
Okay, so I can, okay, so I can talk about it. What you can do, you can ask you know, to put what is the reaction about it? And they can use, if your students, or you can have them type a sign with how did you feel about this session, and show it. The problem is that most students may not want to show the camera, want to be on the camera, but this could be an incentive to see their faces. So it's very nice to see the sign. This was excellent. I feel great. The sign up. Okay, I'm done with my suggestions. And now we're open to the questions and answer part, right, Holly? Okay.
Yes, so I know we've had quite a few questions in the chat, and our presenters have been really good about keeping up with those. If there are any other questions that you have, feel free to either type them in the chat, or we can, if you want to raise your hand with the reaction, we can unmute you and you can speak to what your question is. Only one thing I did want to point out though, Judy Kahn is in the session and she made a good point while Henry was showing the whiteboard. So the whiteboard can be great, and we saw how it was kind of a nice break from just listening to us talk. You actually got to participate. To make sure that works though, in the settings, so the screen that Patrizia had showed you about, you know, the settings for your Zoom meetings, I believe you do have to enable the whiteboard to get that activity to work. So that's just something you might want to double check before you jump into a Zoom meeting with your students and try to do the whiteboard. You might just make sure that that is turned on. Okay, so we do have some good questions here. So Jill asks, for those of you who use authentication, was that ever a barrier for students to join the class?
I think that's is that in regard to the settings to John Jay domains only? If so, no. The answer is no, not for the small class that I taught.
Suzanne, did you experience any difficulties there?
I didn't use authentication. I had the students pre-register for the class, but I encouraged them to use their John Jay email, but some of them ended up using other email addresses from either other CUNY schools or personal, because I was actually concerned that the authentication might be problematic for that number of students. But it sounds like based on Henry's experience, it worked fairly well.
I use authentication.
Yeah, so as long as they're using their John Jay email, yeah.
And actually, I just sent an announcement yesterday to all students for them to be aware of that, because our first Zoom class meeting is on Monday, and I wanted to make sure that before they try to connect, that they knew they had to use their John Jay email.
I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but did you try to lock the meeting while in session when you do the whiteboard? That's an alternative also. So nobody will be able to get in.
I could post those instructions on how to do that, Patrizia. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, Caroline asks about the screen on, the option to require students to be on camera, which we know that there is a policy saying that students are not required to have their cameras on for a multitude of privacy issues, etc. But have you found any way of nudging them into that direction, compassionately, not making it a requirement, but kind of edging them towards, showing you their faces?
Nancy or Suzanne, do either of you want to go before I do?
You can go ahead, Henry.
So I actually, one of our norms is that you don't have to be on camera, or especially if if you're having a moment, or maybe there's something happening in the background, that you can turn off both your mic and your camera. So I think that would be a little awkward if it was above 20 students. So it works for a smaller group of students. So I can't speak to the mid-size classes. All of my larger classes were async.
Let's see here. Thank you, Henry. So there was a question about polls being anonymous, or if it shows you that. Suzanne answered to say you have the choice. So you can have be anonymous, or you can decide to see who stated what, how they answered. Jose asks, is there a way that you can show us how to use breakout rooms? Patrizia, I don't know if you want to attempt that in the time that we have 5 minutes. It's up to you.
Well, my activity, I don't know. If you want, I created an activity and I can send you all into breakout rooms. If you want, I'm not sure. How long do we have?
We don't have a lot of time, but they're the same way that you shared Zoom, going to the Zoom settings. Maybe you can show going to Zoom settings, where's the option of doing the breakout rooms.
Yeah, because you do have to enable the breakout rooms
Yeah.
in the administrative settings. And then once you enable it, there will be a feature at the bottom of your the bottom panel for the breakout rooms.
So let me share the screen. And let me just share the screen and show you where to find it, okay? Can you see the Zoom on the web? So we're going into settings and I'm gonna type breakout, probably easier. Okay, here is the breakout room. Let's look at the other one. Okay, allow host to split me into separate smaller rooms. I think this should be on. Is there any other place where I think this is the place, right?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. So you just need to like move this little button, and then you can assign participants, or Zoom allows you to do it automatically when you're in session. If you, as Suzanne said, she wanted the people to be in the same group all the time. But if you want just an extemporary breakout room, it just Zoom does it for you automatically. Yes.
They have these short little videos also. If you go to the Zoom website, they have short videos on how to go step by step. I'm going to post one in the chat. Okay.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, we got 2 more minutes, and then we have a 15-minute break, and then we'll be going into your next session at 10:45. Please know that there is a survey that we asked all of our participants to be able to take. I went ahead and put it in the chat. Any other questions? Feel free to put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand. The session will be ending at 10:30.
Nancy, I think the link didn't go through.
Okay, let me just go back.
Today we will be talking about Zoom. This tutorial will focus on breakout rooms and polls. First, we'll discuss how to access breakout rooms, how to set up breakout rooms.
I'm trying to copy the link.
Breakout rooms. Then we'll focus on enabling polling in Zoom, creating a poll, launching a poll, and downloading poll results.
That's a wrap. Should we stop recording?
Yep, we can go ahead and pause the recording at 10:30, but if anyone else has any additional last questions or words, please let me know.
Rithu, do you know where the recordings will be hosted after today?
Yes, so the faculty TLC will go ahead and send out all the recordings for all sessions.
Great.
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know that there's a lot to get into when we start looking at all of the settings in Zoom, but one piece of advice that I've heard a lot of people say is just get some friends together and practice. And so it's very low stakes. And if you make mistakes, it's, friends are very forgiving. So I would recommend trying that. Okay, I think we're done. So thank you for
Thank you so much for joining us.
later on today.
Bye.